Young millionaire bought a black street girl, but what happened next was absurd. He thought he had everything under control, that this bold bet was just a game to challenge his controlling parents. But the girl he chose was not what she seemed. In a matter of days, the tables were turned, secrets were revealed, and the truth got out of control. What began as an affront turned into an unexpected dilemma. Money can buy status, but can it buy feelings? When he realized that his choice went far beyond what he imagined, it was already too late. Stay until the end to discover the simply unbelievable outcome of this story. Matthew was a young businessman who, despite his success in business, felt that his personal life was far from satisfactory. He grew up surrounded by a family that valued status and power above any genuine feelings. From an early age, he was trained to understand that his surname was a valuable asset and that his future must be carefully planned to preserve and expand the family empire. In the eyes of parents, their romantic life was just another piece of this game, and any relationship should be strategically beneficial. He, however, could never fully accept this logic. Although he had inherited a talent for business and knew how to navigate this competitive world, he did not want his life to be reduced to contracts and financial alliances disguised as marriage. Fatigue with the superficiality of this environment intensified with each gala event and corporate dinner that I was forced to attend. He felt surrounded by people who analyzed everything in a calculated way, choosing words and gestures according to the impact they could have. The evaluative look of his parents, discreetly observing his interactions, made it clear that they expected him to soon choose a bride worthy of the position he held. But the candidates presented to him seemed all molded into the same format: impeccable, well-educated, strategically trained to seduce, but devoid of any trace of authenticity. None of them seemed interested in really getting to know him, only in social projection and what a future with him could provide. Matthew wasn't sure when this frustration started to become unbearable, but at some point he realized he needed to do something to break out of this cycle. He didn't want to be drawn into a marriage of convenience or be used as a pawn in family negotiations. His parents expected him to follow the traditional path, choosing a wife from within the inner circle of the elite. But Matthew wanted to do exactly the opposite. He needed a way to expose the hypocrisy of this system and show parents that the true connection between two people couldn't be reduced to numbers and bloodlines. It was a risk, but one I was willing to take. It was then that an unusual idea emerged, something that, if well executed, could overturn all the expectations created about him. Matthew knew that the only way to defy his parents was to go against everything they expected of him. If the relationships presented to him seemed like cold, calculated contracts, he would try to find someone through a completely unusual path that would provoke his parents in a way they could never imagine. He decided to use his social media to launch a challenge. He picked up his cell phone and typed out a blunt post, which in a few minutes was already live, looking for an escort for an exclusive event, generous pay, and who knows, the chance of promotion to wife depending on performance. The provocation was intentional. He wanted to test his parents, of course, but also how far people would be willing to go for money and status. But deep down, what he was really looking for was someone who saw beyond this proposal and showed himself different from the women who always surrounded him. He needed someone who had presence, intelligence, and who challenged his ideas without limiting himself to rehearsed smiles and memorized phrases. He knew that finding this person would be difficult, but he was willing to try. The proposal sounded provocative, and as he expected, it generated a huge uproar. Within hours, the post accumulated thousands of likes, shares, and comments of all types. Some thought it was a marketing ploy. Others believed he just wanted to cause controversy. What no one knew was that this was part of his plan to prove to his parents that not everything in life could be negotiated like a business contract. The flood of messages and calls began almost immediately. Women of all profiles applied, from influencers looking for projection to socialites who saw the situation as a strategic game. Some were stunning models who said they were only interested in the experience, while others tried to impress him with carefully crafted resumes and skills to make them look like the perfect fit. Matthew analyzed each message patiently, hoping to find someone who really broke away from the artificial pattern that had always surrounded him. He organized a detailed selection process to meet the candidates personally, believing that among so many options he would find someone interesting. But as the interviews unfolded, he realized his search was far from simple. The women who entered that room were always beautiful and sophisticated, but empty. None of them could hold him for more than a few minutes without the conversation becoming predictable and tedious. The more I tried to find someone who fit the bill he imagined, the more I felt like I was surrounded by the same world I wanted to escape. After a full day of frustrating interviews, he realized that his idea wasn't working as he expected. None of the women he met seemed genuinely interested in anything other than money and the opportunity to appear alongside him at an important event. He felt exhausted. He needed to clear his head, so he decided to walk to a cafe close to his office, where he was doing his interviews. On the way, he passed a shelter where there was a line of people, waiting their turn to receive a hot meal. He didn't usually pay attention to that place, but something, or rather someone, caught his attention. Among the tired faces and downcast looks, a young woman with a firm posture stood out. His gaze was strong, different from the others, and his expression did not convey conformity but determination. She was black, with tied hair and simple clothes, and something about her made him stop for a moment. For some reason that he couldn't explain, Matthew felt an impulse to get closer. He walked towards her and stood in front of the line, attracting curious looks from the other people around. When the young woman noticed his presence, she raised her face and looked directly at him, without showing surprise or discomfort, just waiting for him to say something. Matthew tried to start a conversation, asking her name and if she needed help, but he only received dry answers. Olivia showed no interest in the conversation, only responding as necessary and looking straight ahead, ignoring his presence. He tried again, praising her determined stance and asking what led her there. Once again, she responded objectively and without room for continuity. The way she behaved intrigued him even more. After a few failed attempts, he decided to get straight to the point. Without hesitation, he made the proposal that no one would expect to hear in that place. He invited Olivia to accompany him to the event as his date, offering a generous reward. For the first time, she expressed something beyond neutrality, but it wasn't the kind of reaction he'd expected. Olivia frowned and laughed, not believing he was serious. I said he must be crazy, that it didn't make any sense. Some people around started to whisper, surprised by the unexpected proposal. Encouraging looks appeared, some discreet voices suggested that she accept, but Olivia remained resistant. He didn't seem like the type of person who was impressed by money or easy promises. This only increased Matthew's fascination because after a day full of interviews with empty women, it was the first time he was in front of someone who didn't show the slightest interest in what he owned. Olivia kept her arms crossed and her gaze steady, showing no emotion at the unexpected proposal. The voices around her became louder. Some people whispered that she should accept it, that it was a unique opportunity. Others just watched in silence, waiting to see what would happen. Matthew there, standing in front of them, convinced that they wouldn't take no for an answer. She, however, did not let herself be carried away by the pressure. I didn't trust easy promises, much less men who thought money could buy anything. He took a deep breath before responding, leaving the air trapped in his lungs for a moment. So with a dry and direct tone, I said I would accept, but on one condition. The money he intended to pay for her company would not go to her, but to the people who were there, in line, waiting for a hot meal and a place to sleep. Also, it should be 10 times the amount he would offer her. Matthew was taken by surprise. Of all the answers he imagined he would receive, this was not among them. None of the women she interviewed throughout the day would refuse that money, much less pass it on to others. Olivia didn't ask for a higher amount for herself. She didn't negotiate benefits. She just made sure that the resources went to those who really needed them. For a moment, he hesitated. Not because I disagreed, but because it went against everything I was used to. I've never met anyone who would turn down an offer like that without trying to take advantage. And there she was in front of him, showing more dignity than many of the people who circulated in the luxurious halls where she grew up. Little by little, he realized that there was something different about this woman. She didn't want anything from him, and that made him question the intentions behind every person he'd ever been around. He nodded in agreement without saying anything else. Her gaze seemed to analyze him, searching for any sign of falsehood. When she finally realized he was serious, she turned to the people around her and announced that the money would be divided between them. The sparkle in the eyes of some and the silent gratitude on the most worn-out faces made Matthew feel something strange in his chest, a weight that I couldn't define. It wasn't pity, nor superiority. It was something deeper, as if he was facing something genuine for the first time in a long time. Olivia took the battered backpack she was carrying and said she would return the next day to find Matthew and fulfill her part of the agreement. Without further explanation, he turned and walked into the shelter, leaving him there, surrounded by curious looks. He stood still, watching as she disappeared between the worn walls of the place, feeling that this decision had just changed more than just the plans for the event. The other day at the appointed time, Matthew was waiting at the entrance of the building where they had agreed to meet. He checked his watch from time to time, feeling his impatience growing. Olivia still hadn't shown up, and with every minute that passed, he wondered if she would actually come. He didn't completely trust her, and her delay only reinforced that doubt. Time passed, and the idea that she might have simply changed her mind began to seem more likely. Just as he was thinking about getting in the car and leaving, he saw Olivia crossing the street, walking towards him without rushing. As soon as he approached, he looked at him and asked directly about the event, without mentioning the delay or any explanation for the delay. Matthew took a deep breath, avoiding any comments about the lack of punctuality. He explained that the event would take place the following week, and that until then, they would need to spend time together. There was no point in taking her at the last minute without preparation, so Olivia would have to be introduced to his family, meet his friends, and become familiar with the environment in which he grew up. It was a necessary plan, mainly to ensure that his presence did not arouse suspicion or draw too much attention. Olivia heard everything without showing any reaction. He just nodded and agreed with short answers. No questions about details, no sign of curiosity. Her indifferent posture bothered him, but at the same time it awakened in him a growing desire to understand why she seemed to not care about anything around her. Now, before we continue, take the opportunity to check if you are already subscribed to the channel. We have many more engaging stories like this, and you won't want to miss any of them. On the way to Matthew's house, Olivia remained silent, observing the city through the car window. The scenery changed little by little, leaving behind the busy streets and worn-out buildings until they reached an area where everything was impeccable. When the automatic gates opened, revealing the property, Matthew expected some sign of surprise, but he saw nothing. Olivia just analyzed the mansion in front of her, with its well-kept gardens and imposing architecture, and crossed her arms without saying anything. Her neutral reaction reinforced the certainty that her presence in that place would not go unnoticed. He knew that once they walked through the door, there would be no turning back. The curious looks, the veiled judgments, and the restrained reactions would begin the moment his family realized that he had brought someone who did not fit into what they considered acceptable. Matthew entered the house next to Olivia, feeling the weight of the moment. The impeccable environment reflected the family's standards, with imposing furniture, heavy curtains, and lighting calculated to convey sophistication. The contrast between that world and the young woman at his side was evident, but he didn't hesitate to follow the main corridor. Olivia walked in silence, analyzing the space around her without showing any reaction. The luxurious environment, which used to impress anyone who entered there for the first time, didn't seem to affect her in any way. She observed the details without dazzle, without hesitation, as if she were anywhere else. This aroused Matthew's curiosity. He expected some sign of discomfort, a minimal reaction that showed that this world was new to her, but he saw nothing. It was impossible to tell if she had ever been to places like this before, or if she just didn't care. The polished floor reflected his steps, and the sound of Matthew's shoes seemed amplified in the empty hall. They walked to the main room, where his parents were already waiting for them. As soon as they crossed the door, the mother's gaze went from curiosity to shock in a few seconds. The father, sitting with a glass of whiskey in his hands, raised his eyebrows, frowning. None of them said anything at first. They just analyzed Olivia, from head to toe, unable to hide their disbelief. The silence in the room became heavy, and Matthew realized that that moment was exactly what he expected. He wanted that impact. Matthew's mother was the first to break the silence. With a controlled but visibly altered tone of voice, he asked who the girl next to him was and why she was there. Before he could respond, she was already on her feet, adjusting her dress as if she needed a moment to process the situation. The father was still quiet, but the stern look said it all. Olivia remained firm, without looking away or showing any discomfort. Her body was relaxed, but her expression showed that she was not naive to what was happening there. Matthew crossed his arms and responded without hesitation, making it clear that Olivia was his companion for the event, and that he would stay there for the next few days so that everyone could get to know each other better. Mom let out a muffled laugh, a mix of nervousness and disbelief. The father finally left the glass on the table and stood up, straightening his tie before saying that this was crazy. The discussion started immediately. Matthew's mother questioned his sanity, saying that the family had a reputation to uphold, that this was completely unacceptable. His father reinforced that he couldn't make decisions without considering the impact on the company, that it seemed like a childish game to challenge family values. Matthew responded calmly, arguing that he didn't need their approval to choose who he wanted by his side. Olivia continued without reacting, just watching the exchange of barbs without getting involved. When his mother realized that he wouldn't give in, She took a deep breath, adjusted her posture, and decided to act differently. He took out his cell phone and made a request to the family's personal team. Without asking Olivia for permission, he announced that she would undergo a complete transformation, because if she wanted to be by Matthew's side, she would need to fit into the family's pattern. In less than an hour, the team arrived bringing racks of sophisticated dresses, suitcases full of makeup, and boxes of shoes from well-known brands. Olivia observed everything without showing surprise or discomfort. The appraising look of Matthew's mother, the murmurs of the designers as they chose pieces, the movement of the team around him. It was as if he had already expected that to happen. Without contesting or asking questions, he calmly went to the room where the transformation would take place. Matthew accompanied her to the door, waiting for some reaction, some question about what they would do with her. But Olivia just entered the room without hesitation, without questioning, without showing any sign of discomfort. She behaved, showing that she understood what was happening, and this made him watch her even more carefully. The process took hours. The stylists worked with precision, analyzing every detail, choosing fabrics that highlighted Olivia's skin, makeup artists softening her features without erasing her essence. Everything was calculated. They weren't just preparing someone for an event. They were molding a woman's image to fit into a world that didn't naturally accept her. The transformation was complete. When the doors opened and Olivia emerged, the impact was immediate. The chosen dress fell perfectly on her body, highlighting her perfectly shaped body, her dark and glowing skin without hiding who she was. The makeup, despite being sophisticated, did not erase its essence. It only highlighted the natural glow that was always there. The hair, previously tied in a simple way, was now carefully arranged, but without losing its authenticity. Olivia didn't seem like an artificial version created to fit into that environment. On the contrary, the elegance that now appeared only highlighted the presence she already had, without needing anything other than her own firm posture. Matthew couldn't look away. His parents were also silent, but for different reasons. The mother, who had previously been visibly upset, now seemed uncertain. I didn't expect that Olivia, even transformed, would continue to transmit strength. The father held the glass more firmly, avoiding showing any reaction. They were used to women who molded themselves to their surroundings, who followed the expected social script. But Olivia was different. Even wearing luxurious clothes, even with makeup to meet the standards of that house, she remained the same. There was no wonder in his eyes, no gratitude for the change, just the certainty that that transformation was just a superficial layer, incapable of truly changing it. Matthew realized that his plan had worked even more intensely than he imagined. He brought Olivia to shock, to challenge the family structure that had always suffocated him. But when he saw her before him, he realized that she did it without any effort. His presence was enough. She didn't need to directly confront or argue. His existence there was already the challenge. The elegance that now appeared only made his parents' discomfort even more evident. Olivia was not a woman who bowed to imposed rules. Her natural strength, amplified by the transformation, made it clear that no matter what clothes she wore, she would always dominate her own space. And that, more than anything, was what made her impossible to ignore. The days passed, and even without Matthew's parents admitting it, Olivia's presence began to change the routine in the house. She didn't try to fit in, but she also didn't impose herself in an obvious way. His mere existence there created a silent discomfort, a break in the predictable structure of that family. The employees, accustomed to following strict rules, began to observe her carefully, intrigued by the natural way in which she occupied the spaces. Matthew's parents maintained a cold tone, pretending to ignore her, but without being able to completely hide their dissatisfaction. Matthew, in turn, was increasingly attentive to Olivia. I began to realize that she had a unique way of looking at the world, without needing to say much to make herself understood. It was during a heated argument with an abusive owner that Matthew saw a new side of Olivia. The man, the landlord of one of the family's commercial properties, pressured Matthew not to increase the rent for one of the buildings. With an aggressive tone and an intimidating posture, he tried to impose himself as if Matthew were just another inexperienced young man in the business world. Olivia, who was nearby, watched in silence until the exact moment to intervene. With precise words, he dismantled the man's arguments, exposing the contract clauses that allowed that adjustment and making it clear that Matthew was just applying a normal charge, still below market values. The impact was immediate. The owner hesitated, stammered, and tried to counter-argue, but Olivia didn't back down. Matthew was impressed. not just because of her intelligence, but because of the courage with which she faced situations without ever losing control. For the first time, he realized that his admiration was turning into something more. A decisive moment for Olivia came one afternoon, when she and Matthew went to a designer store to look for clothes for the event. As soon as they entered, the saleswoman's gaze changed. At first, he ignored Olivia, focusing his attention on Matthew and speaking directly to him. When Olivia tried to ask a question, the woman responded in a short and harsh manner. Without hiding her disdain, Matthew noticed the tension and tested his reaction. He asked Olivia to try on some pieces, but the employee hesitated and without hiding it said that those clothes were not made for every type of person. Matthew's blood boiled. Before Olivia could respond, he stepped forward, making it clear that if the store wasn't for her, then it wasn't for him either. He held Olivia's hand and left without looking back. It was there that something changed. Olivia, always contained, seemed surprised. At that moment he looked away and took a deep breath, seeming to absorb something he had never felt before. Matthew didn't say anything, but he felt that at that moment, something between them had transformed. The closeness between Matthew and Olivia grew in a subtle but inevitable way. It wasn't words that brought them closer, but shared silences, long looks, and spontaneous gestures. Small details started to catch his attention. The way Olivia raised her eyebrows when she heard something absurd, the way she held the glass firmly, and the way, even in an environment that wasn't hers, she never seemed out of place. When she smiled discreetly, as if she didn't want to show too much, he felt there was something there, a silent connection, something they both understood but still didn't admit out loud. One night, when everyone had retired, the two were alone in the living room. The room was softly lit and the silence in the house made the conversation seem even more intimate. Between one sip of wine and another, they talked about light topics, laughed about banal things, until a moment of pause hovered between them. Matthew's gaze met Olivia's for longer than usual. There was no need for words, nor any justification. The space between them dissolved, and when they realized, their lips were already meeting. The kiss was calm, but filled with everything they had avoided admitting until then. When they walked away, neither of them said anything right away. There was no need. Something had changed, and they both knew it. After that moment, Matthew felt he could no longer hide the truth. He looked at Olivia and bluntly said what motivated him from the beginning. He explained that all of this was not just a game of challenge against his parents, but a search for something real. He wanted to prove that true love could not be reduced to money, status, or lineage. Olivia listened carefully without showing surprise. She just nodded and said that she already imagined it, and maybe that was why she had followed everything his parents had imposed without resistance. But when Matthew tried to pull the thread of her story, he realized that something was getting in the way. Olivia talked about her years on the streets, about the challenges and lessons learned, but she never explained why her presence in that house seemed so natural. The way she handled luxury, how she knew certain details, how she never really seemed out of place. There was something she wasn't ready to reveal yet, and Matthew was beginning to realize that Olivia was hiding more than she was letting on. Matthew's mother carefully observed the growing closeness between him and Olivia. He didn't need explicit statements to realize that something had changed. What at first seemed like Matthew's provocation against his family now became something deeper. The long looks, the fluid conversations, and the small gestures that were previously unpretentious now carried a different meaning. For her, that was unacceptable. It was no longer a game or a passing whim. There was a bond forming, and it threatened everything she had planned for her son's future. Olivia didn't fit into the family's standards, and allowing this relationship to go forward was admitting that everything they had worked for meant nothing. So, he decided to act. Without saying a word to Matthew, he got in touch with Emily, an influential and sophisticated woman linked to his son's past. The two had already dated in the past, and for the mother, Emily was the only woman worthy of taking that place alongside her son. On the eve of the big party, Emily arrived at the mansion, being enthusiastically received by Matthew's parents. His confident smile and elegant posture exuded confidence to the point of being a little arrogant, and his presence immediately altered the dynamics of the house. Matthew didn't need long to understand what was happening. The discomfort he felt when he saw her there was instantaneous. He knew Emily well enough to know that her arrival was no accident. It was a plan devised by his parents, a last effort to keep him away from Olivia. Emily knew how to play the game. She made a point of appearing familiar with everything around her, acting as if she had never left that space. She sat next to him, mentioned old memories, laughed at jokes that only the two of them understood. everything to reinforce the idea that this was the right path. Matthew wasted no time. He looked for Olivia and called her for a private conversation. He said directly that Emily's arrival was no coincidence, that it was all a plan by his parents to separate them. Olivia listened without showing any surprise. Instead of hesitating or becoming shaken, he stood his ground. She said that she didn't care about the games in that house, that she was there because she wanted to, and that no one would make her leave before the right time. His confident stance caught Matthew off guard. It wasn't anger, nor indignation. Olivia spoke with the calm of someone who had already faced much greater challenges than that, but something about her still intrigued him. The way he handled that kind of environment, the way he seemed to know exactly how to act. He looked her in the eyes, and this time, he questioned her directly about her past. He asked who she really was. Olivia didn't hesitate. He said that he had always been from the streets, that he had never had anything to do with money, and that the life he led before meeting him was exactly what he had said. Matthew wanted to believe, but something about it didn't make sense. The day of the big party arrived, and the mansion was in full swing with the final preparations. During lunch, Matthew's family and some guests discussed the details of the event, ensuring that everything was impeccable for the night. Olivia remained silent, sitting next to Matthew, carefully observing the movement around her, both empowered and in love. But there was something in the atmosphere that seemed charged, a tension disguised by smiles and superficial conversations. Emily, always confident, chose that moment to stand up and attract everyone's attention. With a calculated look, she announced that there was something important to reveal. The room fell silent, and Matthew felt a tightness in his chest before he even heard the words that would come next. With a cold and objective tone, Emily exposed Olivia's true identity. He said that with the help of Matthew's mother, they had hired a private detective to investigate his life. What they discovered was surprising. Olivia was not just a young girl who lived on the streets. Her real name was Marianne Whitmore, an heiress to one of the richest and most influential families in the country. His family was well known. His surname appeared in magazines and high society events. But contrary to what everyone imagined, Marianne had chosen to abandon this life, rejecting money and social position to live anonymously, far from the superficiality and racial prejudice that always haunted her. Upon finishing her revelation, Emily cast a victorious look at Matthew, hoping he would react the way they planned, moving away from Olivia. The impact was immediate. Everyone in the room looked at Olivia, waiting for her reaction. She remained silent for a few moments before raising her head and looking at Matthew. With a calm but firm tone, she explained that she gave up everything because she was never treated like a real person. They always saw her as just a valuable surname, a passport to more status, never her essence. He said that when he entered that house, he saw the same thing happen to Matthew. Everyone expected him to follow a pre-written script, with no room for his own choices. But nothing she said seemed to reach Matthew in the way she expected. He was in shock. He felt betrayed on all sides. For his mother, who set up the whole situation. For Emily, who used that information to manipulate him. But above all, for Olivia, she had assured him that he didn't belong in that world, and now everything he believed in was falling apart. Without saying a word, he got up from the table and left. Emily tried to hold him back, saying that they could be together now, but he pushed her away without hesitation. Marianne still tried to explain, saying that what she felt for him was real, that none of that mattered. But Matthew, with his eyes full of tears, just looked at her for a brief moment before leaving the room, taking the car and leaving at high speed, leaving behind everything he thought he knew. Did this twist in the story take you by surprise? Leave your comment telling us what you think so far and if you've seen something similar happen in real life. Your opinion is very important. Matthew was sitting in a discreet cafe, far from the hustle and bustle of the party taking place at his home. The soft noise of cups being placed on saucers and the murmur of conversation around them created an almost imperceptible background to his thoughts. He barely touched the drink in front of him. His mind was far away, reliving the last few hours, trying to understand how everything happened so quickly. His eyes wandered around the room until they settled on a couple sitting a few tables away. The two laughed, softly, exchanging looks that said more than any words. The complicity was evident. Matthew felt a tightness in his chest. It was what he wanted for himself, a genuine connection, a real feeling. Then, the image of Marianne invaded his thoughts. He remembered everything they had experienced in the last few days, the intense moments, the sincere smiles, the kisses that didn't seem rehearsed or obligatory. Each look exchanged carried a truth he had never experienced before. He relived the nights. They stayed up talking until late, the the subtle touches that had more meaning than any declaration. He always believed his family dictated his destiny, but for the first time, he found something that felt real. Marianne didn't want her money. She didn't want an important surname next to hers. She just wanted to be seen as someone beyond the fortune she carried. As he realized this, a wave of clarity hit him. His parents had once again manipulated his life so that he would follow the path they wanted. But what if this time, he chose differently? Without hesitation, he got up and left the cafe in a hurry. He got in the car and drove back home. The path seemed longer than ever, his mind buzzing with the urgency to fix what had been broken. When he arrived, he found the mansion crowded. The guests were spread across the room, glasses in their hands, artificial smiles and practiced greetings. Ignoring the confused looks when he saw him run, he went up the stairs and went straight to Marianne's room. He opened the door with force, but the space was empty. The heart raced. He hurriedly went downstairs, crossing the room without caring about the curious looks. He got in the car again and drove to the shelter where he found her for the first time. When she arrived, there she was, in the same place, in the same line, with a firm posture, and her eyes filled with silent sadness. He approached slowly and stopped right next to her. Marianne noticed his presence only when he stopped next to her. He smiled and said he had a proposal to make. She smiled back, understanding the joke about their first meeting. He asked if he intended to pay for the entire shelter this time. Matthew replied that he would pay all the homeless people in the city if she agreed to stay with him. Marianne didn't need any more words. She simply gave in, and the kiss that sealed that moment was not an agreement, but a choice, the only one that really mattered. In the days that followed, Matthew realized that he had crossed a path of no return. What began as an attempt to defy his parents and expose the hypocrisy of his world ended up transforming him in ways he never imagined. Now he understood the real meaning of love. It wasn't about status, power, or an important name in social columns. It was about finding someone who saw him beyond what he had, who challenged him, who made his heart race just by being around. Alongside Marianne, he learned that true happiness was not found in the closed circles of the elite, but in the freedom to be himself alongside someone who truly understood him. Marianne, in turn, also felt her view of the world change. After so long running away from her origins, believing that she could never be loved for who she was, she found in Matthew a reason to believe again. He saw her not as a last name or a title, but as the strong, determined woman she always was. With him, he realized that he could have a future without having to hide his true story. It was no longer about living in the shadows to avoid judgmental eyes. Now it was about facing everything head-on, with someone by her side who chose her for who she really was. Matthew's parents, initially resistant, gradually lowered their barriers. They saw in their son a genuine happiness that they had never witnessed before. Little by little, they understood that love did not obey the rules they always tried to impose. Marianne was not just a mysterious young woman who appeared in their lives, but the woman who made Matthew mature, become stronger, and find a purpose beyond family expectations. Time made them realize that no tradition, fortune, or influence was greater than the true happiness of their own son. And so, Matthew and Marianne continued together, proving that love, when true, overcomes any barrier, defies any convention, and is the only wealth that really matters. Thank you for following this story to the end. Now, before leaving, take advantage of the final screen to continue this journey of emotions and discoveries. First, click to like the channel to ensure you don't miss any of these impactful stories. Soon after, a recommended video was selected especially for you, bringing another surprising narrative that will capture your attention. And if you want to dive even deeper into this universe, a collection of similar stories is available on screen. Choose the next video and continue to be moved by stories that make you reflect and transform lives. Until the next soul-stirring story.